Good morning from Long Island, New York. This is immigration attorney Kyce Siddiqi, and today we're going to be talking about immigration interviews, marriage-based adjustment of status, immigration interviews for the purposes of green card issuance for a foreign national beneficiary who is married to a U.S. citizen. If you have received an interview notice from USCIS, you probably are watching this video, or perhaps you're just interested in or curious about what really goes on in an immigration interview. I have been to numerous interviews and represented clients on these interviews, including something called a Stokes interview, which is another type of interview that we're not going to be talking about today. That would be saved for a different video in the future. Today we're just going to be talking about an adjustment of status green card interview, where a U.S. citizen is trying to impart that benefit to a foreign national beneficiary spouse. You probably are watching this video and you probably did get an interview notice indicating the time, date, and location of the immigration appointment that you have. You also are probably looking at the interview notice and recognizing that there are a lot of documentation and items that you are required to bring. The purpose of this video is to acquaint you with the format of a green card marital-based interview, so that way you have a full understanding of what goes on in these interviews. These interviews, the purpose of them are usually two parts. When you go to the interview, there usually is two purposes to these interviews. The first purpose is to identify whether if you have a good faith marriage. Okay? That is the first purpose of the interview. The second purpose of the interview is to identify whether the foreign national beneficiary or the green card applicant has any issues that would prevent him from getting a green card, even if you have a good faith marriage together. Now let's go and discuss the first purpose of the interview, which is to identify that you have a good faith marriage. After you are escorted inside the officer's room, you will actually be given the oath to swear that everything is true and correct, and be told to have a seat and provide the officer with your civil documentation, which includes the foreign national's passport as well as the U.S. citizen's U.S. passport or birth certificate or naturalization certificate. And of course your marriage documents, which includes your divorce judgments if that is applicable, in addition to your current marriage certificate, as well as the foreign national's birth certificate. After the civil documents are looked at and examined, the officer generally asks, what evidence do you have in terms of proving your relationship is real? The couple should then at that point submit the evidence that is going to establish or help establish that they have a good faith marriage. Joint bank statements, joint health insurance, joint car insurance, joint tax returns, joint utility bills, if they have photos, and if they have affidavits from third parties, things of that nature, to establish that the person and the U.S. citizen and the applicant have a good faith marriage. Now, to indicate to you that there is a set list of questions for identifying whether if your marriage is real, I would say, based on my experience, unless it's a Stokes interview, if it's your first interview and there's hopefully no other interviews after that particular first one, most officers don't read a set list of questions to identify if you have a good faith marriage. Remember, this is different from something in which is called a Stokes interview, which often there is a set list of questions because the officer then has to actually ask the other party the same set list of questions. But on a marital-based green card interview, if it's your first one, hopefully if it's your last, hopefully that's the last one, usually there is no set list of questions. So I often hear, well, what questions are they going to be asking? To identify if you have a good faith marriage, it's normally just a normal conversation. How did you meet? Do your parents know about each other? It's the normal conversation. And the officer then at that point identifies, after engaging both parties at the same time, whether if the marriage is real. Once the officer is satisfied, or once that portion of the interview is completed, the next portion is predominantly going to be focusing in on the foreign national beneficiary in relation to his or her background, or in relation to his or her green card application questions. Now, for that, there is a set list of questions. If you carefully look at the Form I-485, you will notice a list of security-related questions and background-related questions, particularly in the last section where the person is prompted to answer yes or no. Have you ever been denied a visa? Yes or no. Have you ever been arrested? Yes or no. You ever been part of the Communist Party? Yes or no. So those are the questions that clearly will be asked for the second purpose of the interview. Remember, I said there are usually two purposes for a green card marital-based interview. First purpose is to identify if you have a good faith marriage. After that is concluded, the officer generally just asks the person seeking the green card those security-related questions on the I-485. Now, I would like to talk about common mistakes that many couples make at interviews, and you don't want to be that person making this mistake. One of the first mistakes that I often notice is that a couple is often disorganized. Do yourself a huge favor. Get a binder. Unfortunately, when I am present at these interviews, the couples are just looking for documents. They're getting nervous. They're fumbling paperwork. Do yourself a favor. Get an organizer and divide that organizer carefully. Civil documents, good faith marriage documents, things of that nature. What you don't want to do is get tripped up and you're, probably already nervous. You're looking for certain documents. You don't want to misplace an item, but at the same time you want to give the officer what he's asking or she's asking for. Just get a binder. It's not going to cost you more than $5 or $10 at Staples or on Amazon. Get a nice divider or binder, and that way you have your medical exam report, you have your civil documents, you have evidence of a good faith marriage you can just quickly give. Another thing that I notice is that the applicant or the U.S. citizen doesn't know when to stop providing the answer. In other words, doesn't know when to stop talking. Only answer the question that is asked. If the officer asks you a question, answer truthfully and answer in a manner in which answers the question. You don't need to ramble on. It's mostly yes or no, especially on the second purpose of the interview, where have you ever been arrested? Have you ever been part of any kind of military organization or Communist Party? It's yes or no. You don't need to, if the answer is no, provide information that was extraneous or was never asked of you. Another common mistake that I often see in these interviews is that the couple has unfortunately come unprepared in relation to their biographical information. Simple stuff. Dates of birth, date of marriage, father and mother's names. If the U.S. citizen or the foreign national beneficiary have children from another relationship, well, the other person should know the names of those children. Things like that would trip somebody up. I mean, you would assume, the officer would assume, I think many officers would assume that people would know about each other's date of births and date of marriage. But you'd be surprised. I have unfortunately been on interviews where things like that, person didn't know. And that, even when the marriage was clearly in good faith, still raises a red flag. How would the person not know that this person's mother her first name is XYZ? So that is something that unfortunately I see, is that unfortunately with respect to biographical information, you don't want to come unprepared. Another often mistake that I see is that at an interview, the couple does not actually provide a medical exam report when they did not submit it at the outset. even if you did bring it, sometimes some of the officers actually forget. So you don't want to actually leave the facility, the USCIS facility, with doing two important things. One is giving your medical exam report. Unfortunately, that's happened quite often where, you're so fixated at the interview, you did bring your medical exam report, and unfortunately you left, and the officer himself or herself forgot to ask you for that. And now, guess what? Your green card is going to get delayed because the USCIS is going to send you a letter asking for the medical exam report. And that's just going to add more delays to your case. The other thing is signing the I-485. Sometimes some officers forget to ask the person seeking the green card, hey, can you sign at the page where they're required to sign in the presence of the officer? I have had instances, and just recently, where the officer actually had to tell the foreign national to come again and sign the I-485 form. And I'm not talking about the form, I'm not talking about the page where the applicant signs when they submit the application. There is another page where generally it's signed in the presence of the officer. So if the officer forgets, make sure you want to remind the officer, hey, look, I have my medical exam report. Here you go. You're going to likely need this. And also, officer, can I get, I just want to throw this at you. I didn't sign. I was supposed to sign somewhere? The officer is going to like that. In my opinion, if I was the USCIS officer, I would say, thanks for reminding me. We're all human. Sometimes we just make mistakes and we forget certain things. So those are other areas that I think any green card holder should just keep an eye on. Also, what is common is that a person in a green card interview forgets to get the name of the officer. Most of my clients, I tell them before they go on an interview, make sure you know who you spoke to. If your case is in the future delayed, at least now you have, you know who interviewed you for the green card. Most USCIS officers have a nameplate on the back of their door. If they didn't actually provide you their name, you could just take a look at the door. Usually there's a nameplate, and it will say ISO, which means Immigration Service Officer, and get the name of the person who interviewed you. Many people are a little bit frightened. We don't want to ask the officer the name. Okay, just look at the nameplate. And if it's not there, I don't think Immigration Service Officer, I don't think would get mad if simply asking for his or her name. So that is something that you definitely want to do, because if your case is delayed, well, at least now you know, you have a track record of who actually interviewed you and where your case file may be. Another thing that should definitely be conveyed would be the issue concerning your responses to the security-related questions. If you, and even on questions that concern good faith marriage, if you don't know something, you're better off just saying, I don't know, instead of guessing. Because when you guess, you're implying that this is something that is true, or you're making an assertion, and that could just very well be used against you in a potential denial letter. If you don't know something, please, the best thing to do is just say, I don't know, instead of guessing. Another thing that I notice that a lot of applicants make the mistake of is not actually allowing the officer to finish the question before answering. So if you're, especially if you're using an interpreter, let the officer finish, then allow the interpreter to finish, then answer the question in your foreign language, and then allow the interpreter to convey that answer in English, and then move on to the next question. If you're not using an interpreter, allow the officer to finish the question. Remember, this is actually a formal interview. Nobody is there to make friends. So sometimes I have seen in interviews couples giggling or laughing for reasons that are bewildering after a response is given to have you ever been, like for instance, the security related questions. Have you ever been a member of any kind of extremist or communist party or things of that nature? Have you been involved in money laundering, or have you ever used a controlled substance? No. Why no, he, giggle. Answer the question truthfully. And what's with this giggling? I just don't get why this is something that um, would spark laughter. It's a formal discussion, and nobody is there to make friends. So take it seriously, be engaged in the process, listen carefully to the question, and then answer truthfully. What you don't want to do is be aloof, be distant. Remember, a lot of these officers, I can tell when I sit in these interviews, are very good in reading body language. They are extremely, extremely well trained for identifying certain things that many people who don't have that type of experience could identify. So keep that at the back of your mind, that if you are listening attentively and allowing the officer to finish posing the question and carefully listening and being engaged, make the process much more easier. I hope you like this video. This is immigration attorney Kyce Siddiqi, and if you like this video, please subscribe.